Hi everyone, this is Artie from Human Chapters, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction about Human Chapters before we get into the conversation this morning. So, Human Chapters, humans are living narratives with a past, present and future. These narratives constitute of a number of chapters across a lifespan. The aim of these conversations is to highlight a chapter of the narrative and unpack its connections to other chapters. I don't really care whether people are natural storytellers, but I truly do believe every single person here has a story to tell. Here's a little bit of acknowledgement to country. So we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay respect to their tribal elders past and present and emerging. We celebrate their continuing culture and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. So today we are going to have a conversation with Stephen Yearout. This incredible man. I'm not going to say much about it, but Stephen will introduce himself and his chapter today. Go for it, Stephen.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to come on here and tell the chapter of my life. And to start with, the name chapter really means something because our life changes so much when you're starting to look back on it. And we never realize how short chapters can be in our life or how long they can be in our life. So, we're going to talk about dyslexia and what that looks like for a child who was late identified, who was not remediated, not given any support, not in one country, but in two. So at the age of 6 months old, my family moved to Australia. We lived in Alice Springs, and I lived there for the first 8 years of my life. So I went to school in Australia, in Alice Springs. I went from kindergarten through third grade. I was a very happy kid, very rambunctious, loved to be outside and play, loved to go to the bush. I started BMX in the 70s in Alice Springs. So I rode BMX there for a while. School in Alice Springs was, in most people would think that you don't remember things from kindergarten, first, second, third grade, that far back. But when school is traumatic to you, it scars you. Well, I'll change that. It doesn't scar you, it puts wounds. Because those wounds are as fresh today as they were when they happened. They never heal until you really deal with all of that. So I remember, even as a kindergarten first grader, being caned by the headmaster for not performing in school, for not doing the things the way that everybody else did. However, it was never, I don't think that the learning disability piece of this, or dyslexia, had really reared its head yet until we moved back to the United States. We got back to the United States. I had already done about half the year in third grade in Australia. We got back here, we did assessment tests my sister and I. My sister got moved up a grade. I got held back because they said they detected that I had a learning disability and they suspected dyslexia at that point in time. And this was in 81, 82. So they knew what dyslexia was. I mean, they told my parents, we know that your child has dyslexia. We know that Stephen has dyslexia. However, we don't have any support. We don't have any remediation. We don't have anything or even know how to help him. However, the next town over in multiple directions, now they may have something, whether it's good or not. At that point, the only choice that a parent would really have is sending your child to private school at the cost of $25,000 a year. You know, starting in third grade, that's going to be a lot of money by the time that you graduate, right? So starting in third grade, I was paddled almost every day in third grade because I didn't understand how to do the homework, or it was so, the task was so daunting, it was so painful to me to do the homework. I would rather get paddling at school, and then I would get a paddling at home because I got a paddling at school. So it became a vicious cycle. So now you're already having this trauma building up. And school became where it should be a place of refuge. It should be a place of fun, of learning. Learning should be fun, right? But it became a place of torment for me. Once they figured out that paddlings weren't going to work, that I would go down there, take my paddles, and go back to class, whatever. It didn't matter. They decided to start making me write sentences. And every time I didn't finish the sentences, so they'd say, okay, if you didn't do your homework, you got 5 sentences. And it were paragraphs, right? And if you didn't finish them, well, next day you'd have 10. The next day you would have and it would just keep doubling and doubling. And at one point in time, I had 250 paragraphs to write. So they wouldn't even let me go to class. They stuck me in the cafeteria, and I would sit in there every day until I got those sentences or those paragraphs finished. And as you can imagine, I wasn't a huge problem in school. I never really I didn't get in fights. I didn't really act out in class. I was kind of the class clown, and that was a coping mechanism. To be funny would allow people to not see that you're hurting and that you really needed help. The other thing that it masked is it would mask people not ever looking at you and going, oh, he's stupid. That was more painful and scary to have one of your peers look at you and think that you're stupid or you're lazy or you're this. So it would be better or less painful to act up or to make fun of, to be a class clown. So, I mean, I really want people to think about that. It is less painful for you to have punishment from the school or your family than to have your peers look down upon you. So I was really popular in school. You know, from the time that I moved back to the time that that I left school. I was very popular. I was very athletic. We, in 1984, 5, something like that, in middle school. So we went K through 5, or third through fifth is one school. And then you go 6th through 8th is in middle school, and then 9th through 12th is high school. So in middle school, there was a rule passed, or a law passed. It was called no pass, no play. So if you don't pass your classes, you don't get to play sports. Which sounds like, it, at face value, it sounds like a good law, right? It sounds like something to motivate kids to do the work. However, if you're a child with a learning disability who doesn't get any support, and the only thing that's keeping you at school is sports, they've now stripped you of everything. They've stripped you of your dignity from learning how to read and write and spell and be able to actually work at the level that you're at, your cognitive abilities, be able to work and learn at the level that you personally know that you can do. And now they took the one thing that you cherish, the one thing that's going to keep you there. And as you can imagine, the school would be an issue. So that those behaviors and that the fact that you weren't doing your schoolwork, or you were failing in school, that carries over into your home life. So, I describe our home life as an active war zone. Literally from the time that I got into school till the time that I quit school because I had enough, going into my junior year. I mean, think about that. You only have 2 years left of school. And it is so painful. There's nothing for you there. I mean, the level of despair that a child has at that point is unimaginable. So, while we're staying in the school side of this, we start thinking about, right now we start talking about bullying and, people picking on you. And remember, I was talking about the thing that was the most painful for kids was having their peers look down on them. However, I think that I need to clarify that a little bit in saying that we didn't need any bullies. And the reason why we didn't need any bullies is because we were our own biggest bully. We could lie to everybody else. We could tell everybody. I mean, I remember telling people, "Oh yeah, I can do it. I can do it. Yeah. No, I understand. No, I can do it." However, you can't lie to yourself. When you lay your head down on the pillow at night, you know that you can't read. You know you can't spell. You know that you're a failure. And to live with the potential, yet the reality is the failure is unbearable. I now as an adult understand why we have such a high suicide rate in our youth, and why it's easy now as an adult to look back you know, hindsight's 2020. Well, now being able to look back on what these kids are going through, you know, I understand it. I still feel all of those things that I did 35 years ago. Up until it would have to be probably 5 to 10 years ago, I would have a recurring nightmare that I was going back to high school as a full grown man, adult, begging my football coach to let me back on the football team. And all I wanted to do is graduate. And I would have this nightmare over and over and over. And it was something that haunted me. And it was something that hung over my head for a very long time. Because if you don't graduate high school, what kind of jobs are really out there? You know, what is your future really going to look like? Because so now you've taken the bullying of yourself to a whole nother level. Because now you're sitting back going, well, I'm a ADHD, dyslexic high school dropout. Who's going to want me? Who's going to want me in a relationship? Who's going to want me for a career? I'm not going to put myself out there in both fields. I'm not going to put myself out there to be hurt by in a relationship because I don't want to expose myself that I don't know how to read and write and I didn't finish high school. So you have to lie there, right? So now you're building up this facade to try to show people that you're okay, but you're really screaming behind, you know, the wall. You're screaming for help and nobody can hear you. You'll never go in for that promotion. You'll never go for that job that you really know that you could do, but you don't have that high school education or college education. And you'll never want to expose yourself to your employer to tell them, hey, you know, I've got the reason why I didn't turn in on my expense reports or this report or that report. It's, you know, I'm having a hard time reading it, or I'm having a hard time putting together, you know, the information in an area or a way that you can understand it. So, you know, we talk about, especially here in America, I know in Australia, there's a strong correlation between education and prison. And we call it the school to prison pipeline. And we know that if a child is not able to read, to write, to spell, to do math, the statistics of them living in poverty, going to jail, or going to the graveyard are very, very high. And it was by the grace of God and lots of prayers from my parents and my grandparents that I didn't end up in one or all three of those. I should have been the statistic. I was heading down that path. I knew that I was supposed to be more. I knew that I was supposed to, I had a purpose in life. Didn't know what it was, but I knew that there was a purpose for me to do something. So I ended up 6 years after I quit school, I went back because I was so sick and tired of working security jobs and bouncing in nightclubs and working construction. I was tired of working basically manual labor, dead end type jobs because I knew that I was supposed to be more. I was supposed to do more. So I went back 6 years later after I dropped out of high school and got my good enough diploma, which is your GED. In America, you can go take a test if you drop out of high school and basically test out of the rest of high school. Now, obviously, having a GED is not as good as having a high school diploma. But I went back and I passed it on the first time. And that was the first time that I'd ever really seen myself successful in an education setting. I went to trade school and became a systems engineer, network management systems engineer. And I started working for myself. And that was really the only way that I thought that I could be successful, is just working for myself, doing system administration or network admin for small to medium-sized companies. And I've had some lucky breaks here and there. I worked for a very large distributor of network hardware. And I'd been dating my wife at that point for, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years. I have, a little bit later, I had 3 kids. And this is around 2009 time frame. And this is when the economy really took a nosedive, right? So where I had thought that I had finally clawed my way out of, this pit, now I'm back with everybody else going, I need to find a job. Well, now it's not just I need to find a job, but everybody with way more experience than I have, way more certifications than I have, way more college than I have, are all looking for jobs. So guess where your resume goes? It's at the bottom of the pile. So, you to be able to get a job making anywhere close to the same amount of money that you were making before, at that point is, almost impossible. We fast forward a little bit, and I've got 3 boys, and the middle son in 3rd grade, he was diagnosed with dyslexia. He was very dyslexic. I mean, it was very evident. I saw it in my oldest son at a very young age. However, you don't necessarily want to put that on your child, right? You don't want to think, oh, well, yeah, he could probably be dyslexic. But he loved to either look at books or act like he was reading. And he was is very, very intelligent. I mean, he was so above all of the milestones that a child has. I mean, he knew sign language at 6 months old. At his first year checkup, he knew like 25 or 30 words. And I mean, he was so far advanced that you never in a million years would have thought that he would have been dyslexic. So when Aiden, my middle son, was diagnosed, um, I started doing research. I was like, okay, now I have to face this demon again. I have to face this giant again. However, I could take it if it was for me. You know, I could walk through the fire and it wouldn't hurt me. However, I can't allow it to have my son. So, you know, being a parent puts a whole nother aspect on this, because you don't want to see your kids go through pain. You don't want to see them suffer like you did. So you're going to step in front of that demon and you're going to do everything you can to fight and stop that pain from happening. My wife at the time, she doesn't have dyslexia or learning disabilities. I mean, she was always very intelligent, very, very good in school. She never struggled in the education setting. So she didn't understand what was going on. However, I could look at him, I could look at my son, and it would put me right back where he was. I could see my mother screaming at me, going, please just do your homework, just do it. And being able to, it would take me back to all of that. So I constantly was having to relive these things. And so at that point, I knew I was going to do anything and everything in my power to make sure that my son didn't struggle like I did. The elementary school that I went to when we came back from Australia, my kids were going to. They started going to that, or this particular son started going to that school in 5th grade. So the first time I walked in that school, it's changed a little bit, but I started having anxiety when I walked through the front door. I mean, I don't want to compare it to PTSD, but I guarantee you it's the closest thing to that you can get. I could remember the teachers and the things they said, or when I walked past the principal's office, it was in the same place. You know, I had that feeling of fear or anxiety that I was supposed to go to the office come back over me as a grown man. And I thought to myself, what is going on? Why am I feeling this way? I'm a grown man. I shouldn't feel this way. Nobody's going to hurt me. And to realize that that's what these kids are going through every day. We have to protect them.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that they are protected completely. They should never grow up feeling like they are not wanted. They are less than. And that if they walk back into the same school that they went to 30, 45 years later, that they would have these feelings pop up. And so that's why I'm saying it's not scars. They're open wounds. They're just as fresh the day that I walked back into that school as the day that it happened to me. So we keep moving on. We get my son, my middle son, in, a school-led intervention or dyslexia therapy, and he's in 3rd grade at this point, or going into 4th grade. He does 3 years of intense intervention in school. Now his grades got better. He seemed to be better. However, now looking back on it, we as parents put so much emphasis on grades. Are they passing? Do they have an A? Do they have this? But that letter grade, that A, that 100, that whatever, is really subjective. You don't know if that teacher just didn't want to grade the papers that day and gave them an A, whatever. Or they're grading on a bell curve and they're giving everybody, better grades or whatever. I don't want an A for my child. I want my child to be able to produce the quality of work that is a deserving of an A, because I know his potential is an A. If he gets the support, the remediation that he needs, he has the cognitive ability to produce that type of work. And we're building confidence. We're building we're building his legacy for work, his work ethic, and his work value. Right? That's really a key point. We're building their value at that point in school. Because if they know themselves that they can produce this quality of work, they'll always want to produce that quality of work because it means something. That A then means something, right?
Yeah.
So my oldest son, who I had suspected long ago that he was dyslexic, at this point, he is in all honors classes and in the 7th grade. In school, he hits the brick wall. And we call it the brick wall. And generally, these kids hit the brick wall in 3rd grade. And I'm sure that, a lot of your viewers and listeners, if they know anything about dyslexia, most schools say that we can't test until the 3rd grade. Well, that's the year that the brick wall happens. And the reason why it's 3rd grade, because kindergarten to 3rd grade, we learn to read. 4th grade through high school, we read to learn. So if by the time you get to 3rd grade, if you haven't been identified and have already started remediation, you have the possibility of having 4 years of failure, 4 years of anxiety, 4 years of depression, 4 years of scars put on that child that doesn't need to be there, right? Some kids, it happens when the workload gets more, much like my oldest son. We get him tested, and he is actually he tested at a lower level than what my middle son did. And I had psychologists tell me when they looked at his scores, if you would have shown me these scores, I would have told you there's no way that this child would have ever been successful in school without remediation. And he was in all honors classes. So that tells you how much he was compensating. But you know what else it tells you? What is the real level of his ability? Is it here or is it way up here? And because we didn't identify him, because we didn't get him the remediation that he needed, the support that he needed, he is held back because now he's not able to reach that potential, or that, as I like to say, being the best version of yourself because you're properly supported in all aspects of your life.
Stephen, let's stick to that point just for a second. Being supported in the different aspects of your life to reach that potential. When you're talking about that support, what specifically, what kind of support are you talking about?
So, I mean, when we look at an individual or a child, right? For support, there's many aspects to this. Obviously, a child has to be supported in their home life, right? Has to be supported by their parents or their mom or their dad, depending on if it's, they're together or not. You have to make sure that your child obviously is fed, sleep well. That piece of it is taken care of, right? So then at that point, because we're building, if we're going to look at this as building a house, we're building foundations, right? So the foundation has to be solid. Because if the foundation is not solid at home, then you go to school. And do we have the support at school? When we get there, is the teacher so inundated with everything else that she has to do or he has to do that they don't see that child's needs? They don't see that child's over there hurting, because most dyslexic students, especially if they're not identified, let me back. Even if they are identified, most of them are not going to raise their hand and say, sir, ma'am, I need some help. And it's not I need some help, it's, sir, ma'am, I need you to read this to me. Or we're going to take a test, and one of your accommodations is oral administration of your test or your quizzes, and your teacher doesn't remember, and the child has got to be the one to raise their hand and go, I need you to read this to me in front of 25 peers. Remember, we had already talked about that is one of the most painful things that you would ever put somebody through. I mean, as adults, we have to go, would you stand up in the cafeteria with your boss there and say, hey, boss, I don't know how to do my job. I need you to come read this to me? No, you would be like, hey, can I talk to you in your office, and let's shut the door, and hey, this has got to be private. But our kids don't have that. So, this is what's growing and building in me to make sure that I understand how to properly advocate for my kids. And when I say advocate, I mean, what does my child need to be that best version of themselves? What supports do they need to be put in place? What accommodations do they need to be able to access the education the same way that a neurotypical kid would get it, because they have the cognitive abilities to do the work. But that point where the disability comes in, it rears its head, is the reading and spelling piece of it. So if we're not going to support them there, now we're going to say, this child is no longer worthy of an education. And this is the way it used to be, because there was never a good understanding of why this apparently very intelligent child was very smart, very bright, but couldn't catch on to reading, couldn't spell. So why weren't they doing as well as everybody else? And then that teacher a lot of times gets, I've seen this, they get bitter because they think the kid is being, what's the main thing they say? They're being lazy. Why are you so lazy? Why won't you just do your work? And I heard that every day until I'd had enough and quit. So that's why I make sure that my kids or anybody else's kids that I'm standing up for, I'm standing in front of, they won't ever have to say that. They won't ever have to say, I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. Mm-hmm. So I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours researching, reading research papers, reading laws, understanding everything I could about U.S. federal law, state law, local policies, what my responsibility as a parent was, what the district or the school district's responsibility was as a education system, what the state's responsibility was. Because we have to hold everybody accountable for their piece of this. And when we have our meetings, I always end the meeting with, I want you to hold me responsible as a parent. I want you to hold my child responsible as a student. Because I'm going to hold you responsible as an educator. And I ask them, is this fair? Because I want their buy-in. Mm-hmm. I want them to know I'm not just laying this on their feet. I'm not laying this on them and saying, my child has a learning disability, you deal with it. Yeah. No, we are being partners in education. We are being partners in my child's success. Mm-hmm. And we are not going to fail him. I am here to make sure that he gets exactly what he deserves, or she gets exactly what she deserves. And I started looking at this, and if I'm having to fight this hard for my two children to receive services, I'm fighting for all kids. It doesn't put any more effort on my part to fight for everybody if I'm having to fight for my kids. Because if you're going to do this to my kids, you're going to do it to all kids. So, I have big enough shoulders that I will stand, like I said, I'll stand in front of that demon every day and fight them to make sure that these kids have the opportunity to grow up and not have some of those wounds. So that is the amount of time that I spent learning all of this is how Empower Dyslexia came about. I started getting asked if I would advocate. I would go with parents to their meetings at the school and make sure that their children got what they needed. And as you can imagine, this still dealing with all of my own open wounds. When I talk to other people about what their child is going through, I mean, that's on me. That is psychologically, that is very weighing. I mean, it's very, very hard to take on all of the things that these parents are dealing with and their kids are dealing with, because you know exactly what needs to be done. And they're having a hard time understanding what it is too, right? So what do I do? How do I help these parents help themselves and help their kids? So I thought to myself, well, I'm going to do a show. I'm going to do a show, and I'm going to share, and I'm going to do knowledge transfer to allow you as the parent, to allow you to stand up for your child, because you are going to be the best advocate for your child. You know your child better than anybody. You know exactly what your child is capable of doing. You know their limitations. You know their strengths. You know exactly what they need for support. However, you may not know the laws. You may not know how to get that level of support. So I can give you knowledge transfer. I can help and support you in a different way by doing shows. And the people that are still at the beginning of that dark tunnel, when it comes to understanding what type of support my child is going to need, they can go back and watch these videos for years to come. They're always there to support. And that's really what this has been about. And, I personally had to face that demon one more time, where I, at 45 years old, went through remediation myself. And I have to tell you, the first week in the remediation that I was doing, it was as if somebody turned the light on. I was so angry that nobody taught me how to properly read and write as a child, and how much differently my life could have been. My parents' life could have been. How much time it stole from me. Because this methodology was not available and or being taught in public schools. And now I will make sure that everybody knows. You talk about being a light, right? And when we talked the other day, I describe our journey of dyslexia like walking through a pitch black tunnel. You don't know if it's up, down, sideways. You don't know where to go. And most of the time, you're paralyzed by fear. My parents are paralyzed by fear because they don't know, they don't want to do something wrong. So a lot of times you do nothing, which is doubly wrong, right? So you're in this tunnel, and if you're one of the lucky ones and you make it through, It is your responsibility to turn around and go back in that tunnel and find as many people as you can and guide them through it.
Absolutely.
You know, I was going to say, we talk about being a light in people's lives, being that little light. I don't want to be a little light. I want to be a shining star. I want to make sure that everybody knows which way to go. We have known about dyslexia since 1881. It is 2020. And we're still arguing about whether dyslexia is real, what the definition is, what supports these kids need. We as a society should be ashamed of ourselves because, like I said, it puts them on the path to prison. It puts them on the path to poverty, and it puts them on the path to the graveyard. There was a study that was done, and they analyzed suicide notes from 10, 11 to teenage years. And over 80% of those suicide notes all had dyslexic tendency spelling mistakes.
Okay. Wow.
50% of the population in Texas prisons have dyslexia. But yet we only show, now we have a lot of light being shone on Texas because of their failure to identify and treat our students with dyslexia. We show now, I think we're closer to 5% of our total population of students in Texas. We have 5.5 million kids in Texas schools. I want to say it's like 190,000 kids are identified with dyslexia. If 20% of the population are dyslexic, we're almost missing 1 million kids. Over 900,000 kids. Not educating our students, not educating our kids is the biggest civil rights issue of our lifetime. We can either lock them in prison, literally, or we're going to lock them in prison in their mind. They're not going to believe that they're smart enough to do what they're capable of doing. In America, one of our sad times in America is slavery. You know that there was one thing that would cause a slave master to kill his slave. And it was learning to read. It was educating him. I want you to think about that. I want you to hold on to that. They wouldn't kill him for any other reason other than making him educated. If you ran away, they cut your foot off, but you could still work. If you stole something, they cut your hand off. If they talked back to you, they cut your tongue out. But you were their workforce. They weren't going to kill you for anything. You were valuable as an uneducated person. But the second you became educated, they wanted to kill you. So I'll ask you this question. Are we still enslaving people today?
Such a powerful question.
We could sell people all day long in the slave trades, but if we don't educate them in our schoolhouses, we're creating just as many slaves there. So it's my mission until I breathe my last breath to make sure that all kids get educated. I don't care what your color is. I don't care how much money you have in the bank or don't have in the bank. I have never met a child that didn't want to learn. I have never met a child that didn't want to be successful. I have never met a child who didn't want to have their name with a star on their paper put on the board because they did great work. And it is up to each and every one of us to make sure that it is supported and that those children can be the best versions of themselves. Nothing else in life will matter. We need to leave a legacy of who did we help? Who did we better? Who do we allow to make it? It doesn't matter if you survived. Are you helping others survive because they need it every day?
And we say education is a human right, literacy is a human right. Are we truly exercising that as individuals? That's the other question.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you said you had a question?
Yes. So one of my questions was, you talked about your remediation and you saw light when you were taught how to read and write. What was that experience like at that time, learning to actually read, understand what you read, and being able to do it independently? Well, take us through a bit of that.
To put it in words is so hard to do. Have you seen the videos of people getting like the cochlear implant hearing aid and they hear for the first time and they're just crying? They're overtaken with joy and emotion. Or somebody walks for the first time after being injured or walks for the first time. You can't understand what it's like to be able to read independently unless you've never been able to read. So let me ask you this, and I'll ask, this is a question for you and your audience. How many times have you been in a social setting and somebody said, "Oh, I just finished this book and it was great. Oh, it was so this, that, or the other." Right? You've been in those conversations, right?
Yeah.
Being somebody that's dyslexic and that can't read can never be a part of those conversations. Or, "Oh, I watched that movie, but the book is so much better." And you knowing that you'll never see that, or you'll never be able to read that book. In high school, I used to carry around The Lord of the Rings, the book. I wanted to read it so bad because the book cover looked really cool. It had a really cool name, but I couldn't read it. I paid fines on that book. I carried it around because I kept it for a year. I couldn't read it, and I would just hold on to it because I just thought, well, if I try harder, if I give it more effort, if I do this, but no matter how much effort you put into it, no matter how much you stare at it, no matter how much you want to do it, if you don't have the brain connections for language built, not that they can't be built, but you haven't built them yet, how are you going to say, if you would just try harder, if you would just, I know that, yeah, I mean, we wouldn't walk up to somebody in a wheelchair and go, you know what, you could walk if you would just get up and do it. Just try harder. Just think that you want to do it, right? You wouldn't say that to a blind person. You wouldn't tell uh, anybody with any other type of disability, if you just tried harder, if you put more effort into it, you can. It's the furthest thing from the truth that there is, without properly scientifically proven data-driven remediation. The fact that I can write an email now, or letters, or read documents and research papers and enjoy reading now is freeing. Frederick Douglass was one of the most famous slaves here in America. And he said, once you learn to read, you'll never be a slave again. You'll never be locked up. So being able to sit down and put your thoughts on paper, or be able to type them out, and not have to worry about, am I going to look dumb because I have so many spelling mistakes? I have so many this. My wife used to be my spell check. And I would send her, emails or letters or whatever I was going to send. Hey, I need you to review this. Make sure for spelling mistakes. And after my remediation, I was sending a very long email to the school district about things that they were failing to provide students. And I sent her an email, said, hey, I need you to review this email real quick. And she's like, oh, I'm about to go to, lunch duty. She works in the school. She goes, I'm about to go to lunch duty. I don't have time to, sit here and edit your 3-page letter. And she sent me back one word, which was wow. She said, you didn't have any spelling mistakes, not one. And what people don't realize is one of the things that dyslexics become very good at is finding another word to use because they can't spell the word that they want to use. So what is that doing? That is not a true representation of your abilities or your intellect, because you can't use the words that you want to use. You have to use a 50-cent word when you want to use a $100 word. So I can tell you that for myself, it is so freeing to know that I can now enjoy reading. And I've talked about this on my show. I didn't finish an entire book until audiobook really became popular, and I was in my 40s. never read an entire book. That includes textbooks, you name it. And now I get to see my kids read. And I get to hear them read at a level in such a short amount of time that is unbelievable. My oldest son, who absolutely would hate to read, and in seventh grade, I could tell that there was a huge problem. And then when I go to the school and tell the reading teacher, hey, I think he has dyslexia, and she tells me, no, he reads like everybody else. Well, then you have a huge problem. No, he spells like everybody else. Well, then you've got to start asking yourself that question again. Are we creating a bunch of slaves? And I'm going to say this to teachers. I respect teachers so much because teachers can be either the one that makes that child or breaks that child. We all can remember that one teacher that was the one that got you, that understood you, that was able to reach you and get you to grow. So you can either be the one that saves them or points them in the direction of the prison, poverty, graveyard. And I also tell teachers this: don't ever take your job for granted, because you are literally saving lives by teaching these kids how to read and spell and do math. You are literally saving their life with the amount of kids who commit suicide. Suicide is the number 2 as far as reasons for death from 10-year-olds to mid-20s. It's number 2 now. So you are just as important as any triage doctor is. And I want to make sure that their jobs are as easy as possible. I want to make sure that the teachers get the education to begin with about what it is that their children need, their students need, and 2, the support from their administration staff, their state legislators, their federal legislators, and that they get the support that they need to make sure that our children are successful.
Absolutely. Gosh, thank you so much for that, Stephen. That's been a true honor just listening to your experience. And I will ask the final wrap-up question, which is, you have provided so much information just during this conversation, but perhaps 3 key takeaways for parents and teachers.
Key takeaways. Listen to your kids. Your kids are going to tell you what they need. They're going to tell you what supports they need if they're struggling. Educate yourself on what it is to support a child with a learning disability, a disability in general. What supports can you offer the school to help take some of that burden off of them so that they can be the best versions of themselves? We have to make sure that we are the champions for our kids. That would be my key takeaways.
Thank you very, very much for taking the time out to have this conversation. And I will put in all the links regarding where people can find Empower Dyslexia. I know there's a Facebook page, there's a Facebook group, and YouTube channel.
Twitter, yeah, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We're on every audio podcast platform that there is. If you want to find us, we're there.
Perfect. And we'll
And if you need help, please reach out and we will find you the most appropriate help that you can get.
Thank you very much. I'll stop recording this now.